When thinking of a video to release for the holidays, I had to do some reflection. Most of my previous videos have came off as controversial to say the least. This is because they support a style of play that is not yet recognized as competitively viable. Whilst I believe that this particular element of the game will change as Iron Talon gets explored a bit more amongst the pros, at least maybe for Terrorblade, I wanted to step back from the polarizing topics to bring you a guide to a widely known but seldom perfected art form that is Jungle Lycan. And when I say seldom perfected, I truly mean it, as I rarely see people implement at least one of, if not all, of these practices into their play. Seriously, playing Lycan is currently, as it has always been, like walking a very tight rope to the victory screen. One false step or slide of the foot can cause you to fall towards a cesspool of defeat and reports, and we don't want that. Again, we're trying to avoid controversy here to stay with the holiday spirit, and whilst I can promise you that if you play Lycan the way that I tell you to, you probably won't get reported. If you play him incorrectly, you may just get reported. And again, this isn't because the style is controversial in any way, but more so that it's just unfun. Well, more specifically, this is just unfun to play against or with. You, as the Lycan player, will usually be having a lot of fun, but just like a Necro who prolongs death timers and always steals kills from your teammates, all you're really doing is prioritizing objectives and just not showing up to fights. And people hate that shit. But anyways, let's get on to the build and gameplay. Before you do anything game related, however, as soon as you load into the next game that you're going to play, you're going to be hitting this button right here. Mute all chat is going to become the name of the game for you when playing this style of Lycan. Why? Because you don't particularly care about what your team has to say to you, and you definitely don't care about what your enemies have to say either. While the latter should be obvious, allow me to explain the former. Basically, none of your allies can really help you in any way verbally. You're not going to be smoke ganking with them or even teamfighting. You're not going to be in lane with anyone else that you'll need to communicate with, as you'll be in the jungle instead. And lastly, there's a good chance that anything that they will tell you will just be genuinely bad advice. Lycan, come fight with us! Is a very common but very bad piece of advice I often see when playing this style of Lycan when I don't mute my team. And it's usually enough for me to warrant muting them right from the get-go. But if that's not enough, people will usually flame you when you don't show up to a team fight over a tier 2 tower while you're busy taking their racks. And no one benefits from getting flamed. So just trust me, mute your team, you're better off without them. Actually, come to think of it, playing Lycan can likely be equated to just playing a different version of The Sims. You're constantly playing a PvE adventure game, complete with enemies, bosses, and evil bases to destroy. You gain gold and EXP for your trials, and even purchase neat items to help you on your quest to slay the ancient of your opposition. It seriously reminds me of just playing some console RPG out of the 90s. However, I digress. We'll be starting every game with an Iron Talon and a set of tangos. In the Dragon Ball Terrorblade guide, I didn't recommend anything outside of an Iron Talon for your starting item build because of how early your suicide timing was. On Lycan, however, we can manage to stay in the jungle until usually about level 3 or 4, and we don't have the luxury of being able to kite camps. This being said, we still want to use our creeps to tank for us, similar to how Terrorblade uses his illusions. And I'm sure you're all familiar with how this works, so I won't waste too much time explaining it. Basically, use your creeps to tank until they get low, then micro them out and tank with your hero. We should be keen on avoiding Ursa camps as much as possible early on, and furthermore, trying to dodge centaur stuns by moving our hero in one direction and our creeps in the other after we've aggroed them. After you've deemed it a good time to buy out and suicide, usually indicated by you having no mana left in the tank, do so and tell your team that it was on purpose. Even if we have them muted, we still don't want to seem like a noob and lower their morale. It should be noted that from this point onwards, after we've suicided, the earlier quip about avoiding Ursa camps doesn't apply. However, you should still try to avoid their clap and the centaur stun. Something I also forgot to mention was that every time we're in the fountain, at least in the early stages of the game, we should be trying to summon our wolves to get a free cast, so to speak. What I mean by this is that essentially, when you're in the fountain and you cast your wolves, you can then send those wolves off to another camp as your hero is regenning the mana, and then follow them with your hero once you've hit about full mana to essentially gain a free cast, because wolves have a duration of 55 seconds, and it only takes you about 10 seconds to get out of the base. So, especially at the start of the game, around the 53-second mark of the timer when it's counting down, you want to summon wolves to go send them out to both runes and scout out for your team. And then again, after they've expired and the game has started, so to speak, and the creeps have spawned, around the 8-second mark, so that you can summon them, send them to the first camp, regen up with your hero, send him out, and then you should hit the first neutral camp when it spawns around the time when you're ready to actually start taking the camp with your wolves. And then you'll have full mana. As long as you're spamming Iron Talon in an efficient manner, hitting the highest health creep when you're about to finish off a low HP one, or using it on the most damaging creep even when it's low to ensure that you take less damage, you should be able to suicide and still get Vlads around 8 minutes. Expect to add or subtract a minute to that time depending on your RNG with camps, your ability to micro, and other various things like people coming into your jungle trying to screw with you. Either way, we're aiming to solo Roche before the 10-minute mark, which definitely shouldn't be a problem with the new patch. Microing versus Roshan may be daunting if this is your first time playing as Lycan. I can't simply tell you a whole lot outside of primarily have your wolves tank until they get low, then back them up to tank with your hero. Make sure to mostly have them tank, however, whenever they can. And above all else, always make sure everything is auto-attacking. The only way you and your wolves are really going to heal is if you lifesteal, and that's why we're trying to always make sure we auto-attack. And yeah, outside of that, I mean, just get in a custom game and try it out, I suppose. Or just rewind the video. To be honest, this kind of sums up the first 10 to 12 minutes of the hero, quite honestly. Just get into a custom game and try him out. He's one of those heroes that has a very stagnated style of play in the early levels, similar to a safe lane carry. Unlike a safe lane carry, however, who might have to occasionally deal with bullcrap aggro duel and tri-lanes, or broodmother, the only thing you really need to worry about is the occasional peekaboo from a few stray roamers and camp RNG. With Iron Talon, you should be able to ensure that no one can actually kill you after you've already suicided, because you'll be able to sustain your HP through the Vlad components and proper micro. Especially once you hit level 6, roamers may as well have just gone AFK for 30 seconds as they desperately look for you in the jungle, only to see you run off at the speed of light at the first sign of them. From here on out, we'll talk about item progression in the gameplay. As mentioned before, you start Iron Talon and Tangos, and then work towards a Vlad's before any other item. I've heard a lot of discussion about how Vlad's is becoming a worse item on this hero somehow, but don't buy into the snake oil. Get Vlad's. Trust me, I've done the maths. The item is the best way to improve this hero's damage output from a split pusher's perspective, and between it and tread swapping, you almost never have mana issues. After Vlad's, we solo Roshan. Then we want to be hopping back and forth in between the Ancients, the hard camp near them, and whatever lane is closest for farm. If your team is getting pissed that you're suddenly showing up in their lane to farm it, you shouldn't hear them because you should have them muted. Don't disobey me when I tell you to do something. Look to get kills in towers with the Aegis. You're literally a one-man army. I think if Valve bought out the sound rights to Billy Mays and had his voice scream that Lycan has the Aegis when you pick it up, enemy players would literally still forget that you have it, and so you should take advantage of this. When you have Aegis is basically the only time I ever recommend you grouping with your team and looking for kills, because of how much of an insane power spike it usually means for you. Anyways, after Vlad's, we go straight into Power Treads, and then get a Necro 1. Then, we get Deso. A lot of people ask me why I don't go straight into Necro 3 before I get the Deso. Well, the short answer is that I did the maths, but the long answer is that the value of having a Necro 1 and Deso is greater than just having a Necro 3, from a tower killing perspective. You still want to get a Necro 3 eventually though, so don't think that I'm trying to say that it's a bad item by any means. We just have no reason to rush straight into it. After we get Deso, we have to do a game assessment. If we feel like all we need is straight damage, we should get our Necro 3 as quickly as possible and then follow it up with an Assault Cuirass. These two additions to our arsenal make us an objective killing monster, and I recommend this build generally for winning game scenarios. If the game looks close and we think we need the ability to split push on a dime's notice, we should however get bots. We have 2 feet after all, so getting 2 boots isn't necessarily a bad thing. In all seriousness, keep both boots until you become strapped for the item slots. Power Treads is an amazing item on this hero, and I try to keep it as long as possible, similar to the Iron Talon. Finally, if we need the ability to whack on towers for as long as possible, but we just can't seem to get away with this because they have a pesky Lion or Shadow Shaman on their team, get a BKB. Be forewarned, I'm not a big fan of BKB on this style of Lycan, as it usually equates to a lost game. You should be trying to dodge stuns by splitting up your units and using them to kill squishy supports that TP back for you and try to solo kill you. BKB is really just for that extra few autos that you need to finish off a Rax or a tower that just will not die. After that, save for buyback. People usually get this delusion in pubs that no one ever saves for buyback, and you're going to take advantage of this way of thinking by always having buyback after you've gotten your bots. Because with buyback and bots, if the whole enemy team is pushing, you can essentially just end the game. And here's how it works. People will usually be so surprised after they've finally killed you for a change that amidst their surprise and that glimmer of hope that they get, they'll usually forget to bring a TP with them as they push out the mid lane. Meanwhile, since you've been pushing out one or both the side lanes the entire game, you have a fresh and proxy lane to TP back into after you've bought back. Boom! That's a dead ancient. And that's another 25 MMR. If you like this guide and want to see more of me, even though I have a rather infrequent upload and stream schedule, then you can find me either here or on Twitch at the respective links down below. Otherwise, let's make 2016 the year of rats.